All right. So one of the trickiest things, really, apart from sort of like how to start something, well, this is to do with how to start a piece of writing, actually, because it's one of the most common sort of questions that I get asked as a teacher when it comes to the writing. Is okay, yeah, sure, but how do I begin? And you know what? I don't think, the more I think about it, the more I think people aren't actually struggling on how to begin. You know, people know how to start an email or a letter or an article or what have you. You know, we know how to do this in station, of course. The issue isn't necessarily that first opening sentence. The issue is what comes after. Because people are sort of looking into the void, that empty void of, okay, what do I fill that with? What do I do? What ideas do I develop? Which is stopping them actually just putting pen to paper and making a start. And this is where planning comes in handy. Now, we've talked about SLAP before, obviously, and SLAP still is very important. So in this case, if you're following along, this is the sample paper 2 for the level 2 writing. So this one, for instance, is the youth magazine one where you write an article about one thing you'd like to change in the world. So SLAP, we already know situation, what I'd like to change, layout, article, audience, young people, purpose, to explain. So that already tells us a whole bunch. That tells us what the topic is very nebulously. It tells us we're going to have a headline, we can have you know, the author's name, date, Tells us, because the audience, we can probably be quite informal and chatty, but obviously still using standard spoken English. And of course, the purpose tells us that we're just including quite a lot of description here. We're working through this idea, really. It gives us a lot of scope. I do like this style of question. It gives you a lot of scope. But the trouble is, of course, when that scope, when that vast canvas becomes a bit intimidating. And the way you approach this is like this. What we do, well, this is one method anyway, and if it works for you, fantastic. It does work for quite a few people. We almost create a table, and you can do this in the exam if you want. So on one side, stuff that we have to include. On the other side, ideas we need to develop. So stuff that we have to include. Well, we need to, yeah, something we'd like to change. That's the first one, really, isn't it? And again, so now I'm thinking, well, what? Come up with what we change. And again, we're also starting to think about the consequences, aren't we? What happened? Yeah. So we're starting to think, okay, so we're also going to have to write about the consequences here. So, and again, this one quite handy gives us little bullet points. So how would your life be different? So what would change? And how the world be. Now, depending on what you choose, obviously with this question, and this is how this works, it gets you thinking. You're asking yourself questions here. So as you can see, depending on what you choose to change, either quite a lot's going to change or not much. And that's different as well, because to be honest with you, the world might change radically or it might not change at all. You know, your life might change radically or it might not change at all. Right? So let's think about this. Let's basically, I was just going to work through this quickly with this and just show you what I mean. So something I'd like to change. I'd like to make it so you don't get static electric shocks. Okay, pretty straightforward one, really, isn't it? Okay, so why do I want to change it? Well, what I can do here is, so basically, if I'm going with this, then I really should be developing why, especially why I'd choose something so mundane and trivial. You know? So I need to do a bit of thinking here, you know? So that tells me maybe I could really use quite a lot of hyperbole here to sort of ramp up the humour, jokes. Yeah. Maybe I'll compare having a static shock to some terrible, arduous thing that's going on, right? And then why do I want to change it? Well, put simply, it's a pain. And again, as it's something trivial, I'm going to be drawing on jokes and humour. Okay. So can you see already, as I'm asking myself these questions, what I'm going to write is changing? Can you? So it's shifting. You know, I'm sort of getting a better idea as I work through this process in my head, as I'm thinking about what I have to include and what that means in terms of ideas I've got to develop. I'm already starting to think about stuff. I'm already starting to make notes. I'm already starting to think about what direction this is taking. I had no idea from the start when I actually started this process where this was going to go. But now, as I'm sort of talking it through to myself, as I'm making these notes, I'm getting these ideas. Okay. And it won't necessarily come completely easily, absolutely. But hopefully this sort of process will help. And again, how would things be different? Well, I don't know. Come up with really daft stuff like I've never have to fear taking stocks out of dragon. You know, that sort of thing. How would the world be different? And again, I can use jokes here, really, couldn't I? But again, I'm using a sense of humor. I'm talking about something super mundane, so I'm using that sense of humor. So just to recap, when you get a task like this, it will be divided. You know, they will give you information that you're expected to include. However, there's a lot of scope for developing ideas. Just jotting down what you need to include will lead to you hopefully asking yourself questions about, okay, so what ideas do I need to expand here? And it will lead to answers as well. Instead of just looking at it as a whole, you're breaking it down. You're turning it into chunks, you know? You're thinking, okay, instead of looking at this and thinking I've got to include all of this, you're breaking it down step by step. So this needs to be included. What ideas do I need to develop? This also needs to be included. What ideas do I need to develop? So hopefully you might find this process useful.